NCRT single sentence questions, chapter 17, breathing and exchange of gases. Let's start. Question number 1. Oxygen is utilized by the organisms to indirectly break down simple molecules like what? To derive energy to perform various activities. Glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, and the glycerol. Oxygen utilized by the organisms to indirectly break down simple molecules like glucose, amino acid, fatty acids, likewise to derive energy to perform various activities. Next, question number 2. Which is harmful is also dash, which is harmful is also released during above catabolic reaction. That above catabolic reaction, what we mean that in the given oxygen when it is utilized, what will be released over. It is therefore evident that oxygen has to be continuously provided to the cells and carbon dioxide produced by the cells have to be released out. Okay, then question number 3. Process of exchange of oxygen from the atmosphere with carbon dioxide by the produced by the cells is called breathing. Okay, and it is commonly known as respiration, but exactly you have to say it as breathing. Mechanism of breathing varies among different groups of animals depending mainly on their habitats and levels of organization. Okay, lower invertebrates like sponges, ciliate, flatworms, likewise exchange of oxygen with carbon dioxide by simple diffusion. Simple diffusion which occurs through their entire body surface. Next, question number 6. Earthworm use their moist cuticle, and insects have a network of tubes. What do we call the network of tubes? Tracheal tubes, tracheal system to transport the atmospheric air within the body. Okay, then special vascularized structures of most of the aquatic arthropods and mollusks are gills. Vascularized bags which are used by the terrestrial forms for respiration are vascularized bags used by terrestrial forms for respiration are lungs. We can call them as lungs. Bronchial respiration means respiration with gills is called bronchial respiration. Pulmonary respiration means respiration with lungs is called pulmonary respiration. Among the vertebrates, fishes use gills, whereas amphibian, reptile, birds, mammal respire through lungs. Then, like frogs, amphibians like frogs can respire through their skin, and we call that respiration as a cutaneous respiration. Respiratory organs of fishes are gills. Respiratory organs of amphibian, reptile, birds, and mammals, lungs. Moving on to the question number 14. Amphibians like dash can respire through moist skin and respiration also. Frogs and such respiration we call cutaneous respiration. Method of exchange of gases in protozoans. Simple diffusion. Respiratory surface of earthworm is moist body wall. Respiratory surface of earthworm is moist body wall. Respiratory system of insects. In respiratory system of insects is called tracheal system. Respiratory organs of spiders and scorpions. The spiders and scorpions have book lungs. Special vascular structure used by most aquatic arthropods and mollusks for respiration. We call gills. Okay. Vascular bags used by terrestrial forms for the exchange of gases. Lungs. Respiratory organs of fishes and larvae of amphibians. Gills. Respiratory organs of reptile, birds, and mammals are lungs. Respiratory organs of adult frogs. Respiratory organs of adult frogs, lungs and skin, pulmonary and cutaneous respiration. A well-developed respiratory organ of mammals, lungs. Structures opens out above the upper lip for intake of gases in human being. External nostrils. External opening above the upper lips in human being are, as we can see, the external nostrils. Write the passage of air from external nostrils to internal nostrils. From external nostrils, first, what will come? Vestibular part, and then vestibular part. Then it opens into the respiratory part, then olfactory part. Then it opens into internal nostrils. Nasal chamber opens into the nasal chamber opens into 28. Pharynx. The dash opens through the larynx region into the pharynx opens through the larynx region into the trachea. The dash is a cartilaginous box which helps in sound production and hence called sound box. Larynx. During swallowing, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis to prevent the entry of food into the trachea or larynx, we can call. The dash is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity which divides at the level of trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity which divides at the level of fifth thoracic vertebrae into a right and left primary bronchi. Dash leads to a nasal chamber through nasal passage. External nostrils. External nostrils leads to nasal chamber through the nasal passage. Each primary bronchi undergoes repeated divisions to form the secondary and tertiary bronchi and bronchiole, ending up in very thin terminal bronchiole. So, secondary bronchi and tertiary bronchi, and finally ending up with terminal bronchioles. The tracheae, primary, secondary, tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles are supported by C-shaped, incomplete cartilaginous rings. C-shaped, incomplete cartilaginous rings. Then each terminal bronchiole gives rise to a number of very thin, irregular walled, vascular, bag-like structures called alveoli. The branching network of bronchi, bronchiole, and alveoli comprises of lungs. Comprises the lungs. We have two lungs which are covered by a double-layered pleura with pleural fluid between them. Dash reduces the friction on the lung surface. Dash reduces the friction. Pleural fluid reduces the friction on the lung surface. The outer pleural membrane is close contact with thoracic cavity, and whereas the inner pleural membrane is in contact with lung surface. Thin, leaf-like, elastic, cartilaginous flap of larynx is. Thin, leaf-like, cartilaginous, elastic flap of pharynx is. Larynx is epiglottis. The windpipe, a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity, is called trachea. Shape of cartilaginous structure which supports the trachea are C shape. Branches of bronchi are primary, secondary, and tertiary. Branches of bronchioles are primary, secondary, and tertiary. Terminal bronchiole and respiratory bronchiole. Terminal and respiratory bronchiole. Trachea is branched as immediate branch of trachea is primary bronchi. Bronchi are branched as bronchioles. Type of cartilaginous in the cartilages in the C-shaped cartilaginous rings of trachea, hyaline cartilage. C-shaped cartilaginous structures of trachea are incomplete at this side. Dorsal, or in human language we can say posterior side. On entering into the mid-thoracic cavity, trachea divides as right and left branches at this level. Fifth thoracic vertebrae. At the level of fifth thoracic vertebrae, that branch of bronchi which enters into the lungs, primary bronchus. Write the path of air from the trachea to primary bronchioles. So trachea branched into primary bronchi, then secondary bronchi, then tertiary bronchi, primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchi. Then primary bronchiole opens branched into secondary bronchiole, then tertiary bronchiole, terminal bronchiole, respiratory bronchiole. Internally, trachea lined by pseudo-stratified epithelium with goblet cells secrete the mucus. From this branch onwards, all the branches are exclusively located in the lungs. Secondary bronchi onwards, you'll find everything in the lungs. Final branch of trachea in an upside down tree. Alveolar duct, last branch of trachea, alveolar duct. Double-layered peritoneal layer which covers the lungs. Pleural peritoneum. Fluid between the pleural layers is called pleural fluid. Fluid between the pleural layers is called pleural fluid. Outer pleural membrane is in close contact with thoracic lining. Inner pleural membrane is in close contact with lung surface. The part starting with external nostrils up to the terminal bronchiole constitute conducting part. Alveoli and their ducts form respiratory and exchange part. Respiratory, or we can call exchange part. Conducting part transport the atmospheric air to. Conducting part transport the atmospheric air to alveoli. Part of respiratory system which clears air from foreign particles, humidifies, and brings the air to body temperature. Conducting part. Site of actual diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the blood and atmospheric air. Exchange part we can call. Thoracic chamber formed dorsally by the border, what you call vertebral column. Ventrally sternum, lateral borders we call ribs. Dorsally vertebral column, ventrally sternum, laterally ribs. Structures which are lower side of thoracic chamber is. Structures which are lower side of thoracic chamber is dome-shaped diaphragm. Anatomical setup of lungs in the thorax is such that any change in the volume of thoracic cavity will be reflected in the lung cavity. The reason for this setup, such an arrangement is essential for breathing, as the pulmonary volume cannot be directly altered. Pulmonary volume cannot be directly altered. This is the reason such an arrangement is essential for breathing, as the pulmonary volume cannot be directly altered. Atmospheric air with 21% of oxygen drawn in an alveolar air rich in carbon dioxide is sent out. Process called breathing, or we can call ventilation. Movement and exchange of gases across the alveolar membrane. This process called transport of gases. Oxygen transport from the blood of pulmonary capillary to systemic capillaries of body parts, and carbon dioxide transport from systemic capillaries to pulmonary capillaries of lungs. Process called transport of gases. Transport of gases. Wait, here we did a small mistake. Here it is called diffusion of gases. Movement and exchange of gases called diffusion. Transport from capillary, pulmonary capillary to systemic capillaries we call transport of gases. Exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the blood of systemic capillaries and tissues possible by diffusion. Utilization of oxygen by the cells for catabolic reaction and resultant production of carbon dioxide and water is possible by cellular respiration. The movement of air from the atmosphere to lungs and lungs to atmosphere is possible by creating a pressure gradient. By creating a pressure gradient between the lung and atmosphere. Between the lung and atmosphere. Two stages involved in the breathing are inspiration and expiration. Pressure in the lungs can be termed as intrapulmonary pressure. If intrapulmonary pressure is less than the atmospheric pressure, it leads to inspiration. If intrapulmonary pressure is more than the atmospheric pressure, it leads to expiration. Negative pressure in the lungs with respect to atmospheric pressure leads to negative pressure, nothing but inspiration. Muscles of ribs help in the mechanism of breathing. Intercostal muscles. Muscles of diaphragm help in the mechanism of breathing. Radial or phrenic muscles we call. Radial or phrenic muscles. Intake of atmospheric air into the lungs is called. Intake of atmospheric air into the lungs is called inspiration. Release of alveolar air to the exterior called expiration. Active process of breathing, inspiration. Passive process of breathing, expiration. Process of breathing occur by the contraction of muscles. Process of breathing occur by the contraction, that means active process, inspiration. Relaxation of muscle, expiration. Contraction of these muscles result the inspiration. The muscles helpful for the inspiration are external intercostal muscles, and muscles which are associated with the ribs, as well as muscles associated with the diaphragm we call phrenic muscles or radial muscles or diaphragm muscles, we can say in general. Then relaxation of these muscles results the expiration, relaxation of same muscles, and when these muscles relax, that leads to the expiration. Intrapulmonary pressure lowers than the atmospheric pressure by the contraction of these muscles. Intrapulmonary pressure lowers by the contraction of. That means the same muscle, external intercostal muscle and phrenic muscle do this process. Intrapulmonary pressure higher than atmospheric pressure. Same muscles, external intercostal muscle and phrenic muscle do that particular. Increase in the volume of thoracic chamber is possible by contraction of these muscles, external intercostal and phrenic muscles. Decrease in the volume of thoracic chamber is possible by the relaxation of same muscles, external intercostal muscle and phrenic muscle. Increase in the volume of thoracic chamber leads into inspiration. Decrease in the volume. When volume decreases, pressure increases. That means expiration. Increase in the volume of thoracic chamber in the anterior posterior axis possible by the contraction of external intercostal muscles, which the muscles associated with the ribs makes this possible. External intercostal muscles. Next, increase in the volume of thoracic chamber in dorsoventral axis by radial muscles. External muscles. Increase in the volume of thoracic chamber in dorsoventral axis possible by the contraction of these muscles. Same actually. Dorsoventral, he's saying. Wait a minute. Here we did a small mistake. Here in muscles related to the anterior posterior axis, we can call phrenic muscles. Increase in the volume of thoracic chamber. Phrenic muscles we can say. Then increase in the volume of thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis possible by the contraction of dorsoventral. That means ribs. That means external intercostal muscles which are associated with the ribs. Muscles which lifts up the ribs and sternum, causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis by their contraction. These are external intercostal muscles. Overall increase in the thoracic volume causes a similar increase in pulmonary volume. An increase in the pulmonary volume decreases the intrapulmonary pressure to less than that of the atmosphere, which forces the air from outside to move into the lungs, and the process called inspiration. Space in thoracic cavity decreases in dorsoventral axis is possible by relaxation of dorsoventral axis, which means external intercostal muscles. Anterior posterior axis we call phrenic muscles or radial muscles or diaphragm muscles. Decrease in the thoracic cavity leads to the decrease in the pulmonary volume, also going to be decreased over. Pulmonary volume will be decreased over. Relaxation of the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscle returns the A and B. We should fill A and B here. A and B, diaphragm and sternum. Relaxation of the diaphragm muscles, it makes the dome-shaped diaphragm normal again, and external intercostal muscles, not that will come to the normal, makes the ribs to come normal, and reduces the thoracic volume. There my pulmonary volume, the A and B are diaphragm and sternum. The contraction of the internal intercostal muscle and the lateral abdominal muscle help in the contraction of internal intercostal muscle and lateral abdominal muscle helps in forced expiration. Internal intercostal muscle to be noticed over. Forcible expiration. Do we have the ability to increase the strength of inspiration and expiration? Yes. How? How? With the help of the additional muscles of abdomen. With the help of additional muscle. Mostly they are helpful for expiration. Additional muscles of abdomen muscles, forcible expiration they participate actually. And an average healthy human breathe per minute. 12 to, excuse me, 12 to 16 minutes, 16 times per minute. Muscles participate in forced expiration are internal intercostal muscles, as well as abdominal muscles also do this, and internal intercostal muscle and abdominal muscles. Okay, so then the volume of air involved in breathing movements can be estimated by using these apparatus. Spirometer, apparatus which is helpful for the clinical assessment of the pulmonary function. Spirometer. Then the volume of air inspired or expired during normal inspiration or expiration. Tidal volume. The volume of air inspired or expired during normal inspiration or expiration. Tidal volume. Maximum volume of air that can be inhaled during forced breathing in addition to the tidal volume is inspiratory reserve volume. Inspiratory reserve volume. The maximum volume of air that can be exhaled during forced breathing in addition to the tidal volume. Expiratory reserve volume. The volume of air remaining in the lungs even after forcible expiration. That is residual volume. Total volume of air a person can inhale after normal expiration. A person can inhale the total volume of air a person can inhale after normal expiration. Inspiration capacity. The volume of air that remaining in the lungs after normal expiration. After normal expiration, that is we call functional residual capacity. The maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after forced expiration. Vital capacity. The total volume of air accommodated in the lungs at the end of forced expiration. Total lung capacity. Okay, then let's start expansion. Expansion TV, that means tidal volume. IRV, inspiratory reserve volume. Inspiratory reserve volume. RV, that is nothing but residual volume. IC, inspiration capacity. IC, which means inspiration capacity. FRC, functional residual capacity. Functional residual capacity. Expand VC, vital capacity. Expand TLC, total lung capacity. Total lung capacity. Moving on, expand TVI. So, I, which indicates inspiration to a tidal volume, inspiration. TVE, tidal volume, expiration. Same amount. How much amount will come inside, the same amount will go outside. TVI plus IRV, tidal volume inspiration plus IRV is called. That is inspiration capacity. Inspiration capacity. ERV plus RV is called functional residual capacity. ERV and RV is called functional residual capacity. TV plus IRV plus ERV. TV, tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume plus expiratory reserve volume is called vital capacity. Vital capacity along with the residual volume is called total lung capacity. TV plus IRV plus ERV plus RV is called the same, total lung capacity. TLC minus RV is called vital capacity. Inspiration capacity include TV plus IRV. Functional residual capacity include ERV plus RV. Vital capacity include TV plus IRV plus ERV. Total lung capacity include VC plus RV. VC plus RV. Then let's start volumes, respiratory volumes, which is even very important. 500 ml. 500 ml is nothing but tidal volume. 500 ml tidal volume. 6,000 to 8,000 ml. 6,000 tidal volume per minute. For one time, we will have 500 per minute, 12 to 16, calculated in the form of 6,000 to 8,000. 2,500 to 3,000 ml. That is inspiratory reserve value. Find the respiratory volumes. Find the respiratory volumes and capacities with respect to the below given number. A 1000 to 1100 ml. 1000 to 1100 ml. That is ERV, expiratory reserve volume. 1100 to 1200 ml, residual volume. 3000 to 3500 ml, that is inspiration capacity. Then 2100 to 2300 ml, we are making combinations here. Functional residual capacity. 4000 to 4600 ml, vital capacity. 5,100 to 5,800 ml, that is total lung capacity, TLC. Primary sites of exchange of gases in the lungs. Alveoli. Exchange of gases between alveoli and blood capillaries, particularly pulmonary capillaries. Alveoli and pulmonary blood capillaries. Exchange of gases based on some important factors that can affect the rate of diffusion. The factors include maybe the partial pressure, that will be the partial pressure, as well as solubility of gases and thickness of respiratory membranes, thickness of respiratory membrane, it may be surface area and distance of diffusion. These are all the factors are going to influence that exchange of gases. The pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure. That is called partial pressure. PCO2 means, that means partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Partial pressure of oxygen in the atmospheric air, 159 millimeter of mercury. Partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli, it will be reduced into 104 mm of Hg. Partial pressure of oxygen in the deoxygenated blood, that is under normal condition 40 mm of Hg. Partial pressure of oxygen in the oxygenated blood, you can take 95 mm of Hg. Partial pressure of oxygen at tissues in rest. In rest, we can say 40 mm of Hg. Partial pressure of oxygen at skeletal muscles during vigorous exercise, that will be much reduced over because of usage, that is 20 mm of Hg, mercury. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the atmospheric air, very less, that 0.3 mm of Hg. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the alveoli, that is 40 mm of Hg. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the deoxygenated blood, 45 mm of Hg. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the oxygenated blood, 40 mm of Hg. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the tissues, partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the tissues, that is 45 mm of Hg. Amount of carbon dioxide that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure is much higher compared to that of oxygen. Reason, the solubility of carbon dioxide, is 20 to 25 times higher than that of oxygen. Assertion, reason, question it is. Number of layers with the diffusion membrane is made up of 3. Layers of diffusion membrane are simple squamous epithelium of alveoli and basement membrane in between, and endothelium of blood vessels, which is even simple squamous epithelium. Thin simple squamous epithelium of diffusion membrane belongs to alveolar wall. Endothelium of diffusion membrane belongs to the capillaries near the alveoli, pulmonary capillaries or alveolar capillaries, we can say. Basement material of diffusion membrane present between epithelium of alveolar wall and endothelium of alveolar capillaries. The basement membrane is present. Advantages of diffusion membrane to be as very thin layer. It is favorable for diffusion of gases comfortably. Number of chambers in the heart. 4 chambers are there in the heart. The chamber of heart which collects the deoxygenated blood from the body parts, right atria. The chamber of heart which pumps the oxygenated blood to the body parts, left ventricle. The chamber of the heart which pumps the deoxygenated blood, the chamber of heart which pumps the deoxygenated blood to lungs, that is right ventricle. The chamber of heart which collects the oxygenated blood from lungs, that is left atria. Blood vessel which collects the deoxygenated blood from body parts, precaval vein and postcaval vein. Blood vessel which pumps the deoxygenated blood to lungs, pulmonary artery. Blood vessel which collects the oxygenated blood from lungs, pulmonary vein. Blood vessel which pumps the oxygenated blood to the body parts, left systemic aorta. The chamber of heart which receive precaval and postcaval vein. The chamber of heart which receive precaval and postcaval vein, right atria. The chamber of heart which receive pulmonary vein, left atria. Chamber of heart which pulmonary artery arise, that is right ventricle. The chamber of heart from which left systemic aorta arise, left ventricle. This much knowledge is required for the oxygen transport to understand carbon dioxide and oxygen transport. Right atria receive deoxygenated blood from body parts with the help of these blood vessels, superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. Superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, from upper portion of the body, superior vena cava, from lower portion, inferior. Left atria receive oxygenated blood from lungs with the help of these blood vessels, pulmonary vein. Right ventricle pumps the deoxygenated blood to lungs with the help of this vessel, pulmonary artery, aorta or arch, you can say. Left atria receive the oxygenated blood from the lungs with the help of these vessels. The same again, pulmonary vein, question repeated, I think. Left ventricle pumps the oxygenated blood to the body part with the help of this blood vessel. Left systemic arch or aorta or artery. Differences in the PO2 of alveolar air and pulmonary capillaries favor the diffusion of oxygen from two, from alveoli to pulmonary capillaries. Differences of in PCO2, partial pressure of carbon dioxide of alveolar air and pulmonary capillaries favors the diffusion of carbon dioxide from pulmonary capillaries to alveoli. This is returning. Differences in PO2 of oxygenated blood in systemic capillary and tissue favor the diffusion of oxygen from systemic capillaries to tissues. From systemic capillaries to tissues. Differences in PCO2, partial pressure of carbon dioxide, tissues and systemic capillaries facilitate the diffusion of gases from tissues to systemic capillaries. Medium for the transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Generally, we can say blood. Oxygen is transported from the lungs to the tissues through plasma and RBC of blood. Amount of oxygen carried by blood to the tissues under normal condition for every 100 ml of blood, 5 ml. Percentage of oxygen carried through the blood plasma in a dissolved state, 3%. Percentage of oxygen transported by the RBCR. Percentage of oxygen transported by the RBCR, 97%. Red colored iron containing pigment of RBC, hemoglobin. Maximum number of molecules of oxygen carried by the respiratory pigment of human is 4. Binding of oxygen with hemoglobin is primarily related to partial pressure of oxygen. Color of hemoglobin, bright red. Generally, color of hemoglobin, we can say purplish, bluish, red. Color of oxyhemoglobin, that is bright red. Oxygenation of hemoglobin means oxygen binding with hemoglobin. Hb plus 4O2, what it formed? Hb taken 4. HbO2 taken 4. Location in the human body where oxygen binds with hemoglobin. At lungs, it will happen. Location of human body where oxyhemoglobin dissociated as oxygen and hemoglobin. It is occur at tissues. If partial pressure of oxygen is high, it facilitates. If partial pressure of oxygen is high, it facilitates association of oxyhemoglobin. If partial pressure of oxygen is low, it facilitates dissociation of oxyhemoglobin into oxygen and hemoglobin. Factors other than PO2 influencing the association or dissociation of HbO2, carbon dioxide and H plus ion concentration, that what you call pH, we can say H plus ion concentration is said to be pH, and temperature. How which explain the relation between percentage saturation of hemoglobin and partial pressure of oxygen. Oxygen, hemoglobin, dissociation curve. Shape of the curve obtained when percent saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is plotted against the PO2. Shape of the curve obtained when it occurs, sigmoid curve.